There's so many questions people have on halacha, chinuch, relationships, mental health, marriage, hashkafa, and everything in between. Every 2 weeks, I discuss them with senior dayanim of the Kehillas Federation. I'm Mena Reisner, and you're listening to Asking for a Friend. And welcome back to Asking for a Friend. This is episode 14, and we're back with the Rav. In part 1, we discussed what a nisayon is, why hardship exists, how a person relates to tefillah, bitachon, and suffering. And in part 2 today, we're going to turn to some more personal and complex struggles of modern life, pressures, identities, mental health, responsibility, decision-making, and different challenges. As always, if you're finding these series meaningful, please do share it, give it a 5-star review, and make sure you subscribe. Thank you very much, Rob, for coming back in today. So just to explore what types of Nisyonos people face on a day-to-day life, can the pressure of expectations from family, from schools, from community, can that become a spiritual burden? Can that be a nisayon in itself?
Absolutely. You know, it says Yitzchak and Rivka did not have children, and they davened, each one in their own corner. And it says, Vaye'oser loy Hashem. Hashem answered his tefillah. So Rashi says, his and not hers. She'ena doime tefillas tzaddik ben tzaddik, that tefillas tzaddik ben Rasha. Yitzchak Avinu was Yitzchak ben Avraham, and she was just Rivka bas Basul. And the question is, it's a bigger chiddush to be Rivka, to be the daughter of Basul and the sister of Lavan, so why didn't Hashem listen to her tefillah? And the Pashat Pshat is probably that part of Kabbalah's tefillah is chus avos. It's not who's greater. Yitzchak Avinu had chus avos. Rav Dessler writes, it's not so. It's much harder to be a tzaddik ben tzaddik than a tzaddik ben Rasha. Tzaddik ben Rasha, you have a feeling of enthusiasm. It's your own. You have a pioneering spirit. You're rebelling. And therefore, to be Basul's daughter and turn into Rivka is easier than to be Yitzchak's and a son of Avraham Avinu, and that's why Hashem listened to him. How did Yitzchak do it? We have such expectations. And it's interesting to note that Yitzchak did the same avodah of Avraham Avinu, same mitzvos, everything, but he was coming from a totally different angle. Avraham was chesed, and Yitzchak was gevura. So Yitzchak, within the framework of the expectations, developed a different approach to it, and that's what gave him that spirit. But a person actually has to have that spirit of that it's their own. It's mine. It's what I want. And the truth is, when we are being mechanech children, we have to stay away from this weight of expectations. You know, the Gemara in the Durham, the Pei Aleph says, why is it that Talmidei Chachamim don't have children that are Talmidei Chachamim, or don't always have children that are Talmidei Chachamim? And one of the things is ein mevarchim b'Torah tchila. They don't make berachas HaTorah. Now, the Gemara is talking about someone. The Gemara talks to Talmud Chacham. He certainly said berachas HaTorah. What does it mean? Ein lebaruch b'Torah tchila. Same reason the Churban happened. Lebaruch b'Torah tchila. What does this mean? I've had a thought. It doesn't say they didn't say berachas HaTorah. They didn't say it first, which is even a bigger question. Who says berachas HaTorah and doesn't say it first? And the answer is, ladati, that there are two types of brachas. Birchas hanehenen, a bracha on something you enjoy, like food, and a birchas hamitzvos, something which is an obligation. What is the difference between the two? A birchas hanehenen has to be said before you start. A birchas hamitzvos, this is a chatchila ovel asiyasam, but could be said in the middle. As a matter of fact, the Ramah writes in Hilchos Shchita, you can make a bracha after the mitzvah also. Shach disagrees. If you see a Talmud Chacham who doesn't have children, Talmidei Chachamim, one of the reasons could be is he learned, he made a birchas HaTorah, but it wasn't a birchas hanehenen, it was a birchas hamitzvos. And therefore it made a burden on the children. If the father would show that this is learning is the greatest enjoyment, the children will emulate him. And therefore, yes, it's a spiritual burden. As Rav Dessler says, it's hard to be a tzaddik ben tzaddik, and the parents have to give over the joy of serving Hashem, and the children also have to reach within themselves, even though they're emulating their parents, but what is their approach to it? How does the mitzvahs resonate with them?
Well, so the Rav is explaining this as something very valuable in chinuch, that one should show children the enjoyment of mitzvos rather than the obligation. But is that true to one's own avodah too?
It's the biggest enjoyment to serve Hashem. There's nothing more fulfilling and meaningful.
Right. Some would say that sounds like a Hasidish versus Litvish approach, but the Rav saying that's very much a Litvish approach as well.
In Limud Torah, Avraham and Hara, who predated Hasidus by many hundreds of years, says the mitzvah is to enjoy it. V'haravna, we daven every morning.
Right. How about a more modern day phenomenon of people feeling like they've become a cog in the system? I don't know if this is true, but some people feel like Yiddishkeit has never been in history more black and white, and that living in such close communities as we do can create a certain standard of Yiddishkeit. And people look at that as a nisayon. People look at that there's sort of a lack of individualism, and people have a hard time trying to fit in. Would the Rav consider that to be a nisayon?
I think it is a nisayon. You know, when I went to elementary school a few years ago, primary school, there were only 6 boys in the class. And everyone counted. It wasn't mass-produced. Everyone counted. Everyone was valued. Sometimes if a boy was not well, the Rebbe moved the class to the boys' home because otherwise a great percentage of the class, wasn't there. And today, Baruch Hashem, there's been such a ribui, so therefore a person feels, like you say, a cog in the system and being mass-produced. And the person, the way you address it is, Chazal say, chayev odam loymar b'shvili nivra ha'elam. It's a chayev, it's an obligation, it's not just true fact. The world was created for me. Now, what does it mean it was created for me? It doesn't mean me as opposed to you, but there's something within the world that requires me. And without me, the world will be incomplete. And people have to chazal. It's chayev adam loymar. A person maybe has to say it, like many things you say every day. V'shvili nivra ha'elam. The world needs me, even though I'm doing exactly the same thing as someone else, and maybe someone else could do it better than me. But the world needs me. That's from our perspective. The system has to create a perspective of where they're machshav each person, sometimes for their individual talents. I even tell when I speak to people in Kollel, I tell them besides what you're learning, everyone should take a certain chelik of Torah that they're outstanding in. Because if you're all learning the same thing, there's only going to be one person who's going to be the best at it, or the biggest lamdan. But if everyone besides what they're learning, and you strive to excel in, you also have a different chelik in Torah, which you feel you are mitzdayan in it, you're outstanding in it, then that helps the individuality. So one, we have to review that we are individuals, Hashem needs us, the world needs us. 2, we should seek outlets that make us unique, even while being part of a system, and the system has to foster and encourage it.
And a person who's not in long-term learning should look at the world and see how he can contribute with his own abilities?
Correct. Because Hashem created him, Hashem needed him. The Mishnah also says Hashem created everyone looking different. And this was to reinforce this thought. Normally you stamp a coin, they all look the same. And here every coin looks different. This is to reinforce this thought that we are all have our own purpose.
Right. And going back to emunah and bitachon and reinforcing the fact that everything comes from Hashem and it's a nisayon, and a person should work on that bitachon. At the same time, we're also living in a world where a person must do hishtadlus, and if faced with a hardship, one must go through the practical steps of alleviating that hardship for yourself and for your family. So how does one balance the emunah and bitachon, the acceptance of something as a gezerah, as a decree from Hashem, without it being a denial, and it could become unhealthy, and you're not doing anything about it?
Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Hashanah, it says Hashanah is the Yom Hadin, and we're supposed to have Emas Hadin. On the other hand, it says on Rosh Hashanah, a person's supposed to bathe and take a haircut, because we're smeichim ubetuchim, we're joyous, and we're guaranteed that Hashem will grant us a year of life. How do these two things work together? And the Rizk Rav said that first you have to have the Emes Hadin. You have to realize how difficult and how great a din is. And only then can you have bitachon. If you have bitachon without Emes Hadin, then you're not realizing the matzav you're in. You're just in a state of denial, or you're just out of it. And therefore, a person first has to have the emes hadin. Then you can go to the smeichim or betuchim. The Medrash Rabbah says, when Avraham Avinu went to do the Akedah, he was crying, and he was crying so hard that the puddle of his tears formed a river. Now, there's state in Medrash Rabbah. Shimon Schwab once asked, how did the Medrash know that? Where does it say in Pasuk such a thing? And he said something very insightful. He said, if Avraham Avinu wasn't crying, then you should know, nicht normaler Mensch, normaler Mensch, he spoke German. He was a not normal person, and from a not normal person you can't learn anything. And if the Torah tells us the Akedah and expects us to learn from it, it must be that he was a normal person. Normal people cry. So first you have to feel it, not deny it, and then you go to bitachon. And, there is in modern psychology, there's a phrase called toxic positivity. There are people that are so positive, they're toxic to their surroundings. But sometimes you can be toxic to yourself because, of course, everything that Hashem does is be'etzem good. They tell a story that someone was once in front of a Moshe Kabrina, and someone asked him, how's things going? And the person said, nish gut. It's a shlach. The matzav is shlach, it's a nish gut. Moshe Kabrina said, nein, it's a bitter. There's a big difference. It's bitter. It's good. We believe that it's good, but you first have to know that it is bitter. And therefore, our bitachon should not be an escape from the hardship. We feel the hardship, and then we have bitachon. In an earlier podcast, my friend and colleague, Dayan Hul, mentioned Machlekes the Chazon Ish and the Balei Musar, whether bitachon is just accepting that it's from Hashem, or you can change the reality with bitachon. And this is an old Machlekes. Rav Dessler Michtav Eliyahu says it's two madregas. The basic madrega is the Chazon Ish's bitachon, and then once you've mastered that, then you can go to the other bitachon. But you can't jump to the second bitachon without the first bitachon. Many people like to jump to the second bitachon because they'd rather engage in wishful thinking than recognizing the seriousness of the situation. The first thing you have to know is bitter.
Right.
And you have the emes hadin. And then you recognize, like the Chazon Ish, that this was chosen specifically for me, for Hashem, and therefore it's good for me. And therefore you're calm. And we recognize that it's good. Only then, if you reach a certain madrega, can you actually change it with bitachon. So bitachon doesn't mean denying hardships.
I was having this discussion with a Hasidic friend of mine. We were discussing about when we were in yeshiva, and then in Elul, then the mashgichim were very fire and brimstone about almost the language was that you have to beg Hashem for another year and not to look at anything bad that we've done. And it's an incredibly serious, very heavy time, and we all felt this in yeshiva. And he was saying that, no, Elul's a time where Hashem's taking a baby and putting in, I don't know if he had, I think he brought a rebbe that said that it's time where Hashem takes the baby and puts it in the bath and cleans you from your sin. And we were talking about the difference in Mahalchim that we were brought out.
Well, I think they're both true. First, you have to know that you're going to be judged. And then you'll realize the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's true. The Bach, the Chai Adam say that Elul is a Eis Ratzon.
Right.
So, of course, Elul is a Eis Ratzon. I remember when I was learning in Mir Yeshiva, one of the yeshivas then was Reb Shmuel Brudny, father of Rabbi Yoel Brudny, and he said, what does mean Yom Neram? And he would say that the Yom Neram are an opportunity to grow close to Hashem. The fear of missing out on this opportunity is what gives us this emunah. So they both happen to be true.
You just got to get the order right.
Correct. If you want to skip the order, then probably won't experience what Rosh Hashanah is.
Right. How about questioning Hashem? Is that considered a lack of emunah? Or can honest struggle, questioning sometimes be a part of a deeper relationship? Many people, when they're faced with hardship, they can throw up their hands. Why are you giving this to me? And it's communicating. It's developing a relationship. Or is that ultimately not a good thing? And one should work on acceptance rather than questioning?
person who asked a very pointed question was Moshe Rabbeinu, Lama Harei Oisa La'om Hazeh, Lama Zeh Shlachtani. So you see the questioning is acceptable. Now, you could maybe say that he wasn't asking it on himself. He was asking it as a leader, and a leader has an application to do so. As a matter of fact, if you look in Kedushas Levi, that's what he says. That's the obligation of a leader. And the truth is, the Kedushas Levi was preceded by one of the Kadmonim called Rabbeinu Meyuchas. I'll tell you something that comes to mind when you mention this. And I was a Bacher in Mir Yeshiva in Brooklyn. The Yeshiva was Reb Shmuel Birnbaum. And one year, Kol Nidrei night, he got up to give a shmuz. And he said, a few words about tshuva. And then he got very shooken up. And he described how he went to visit Reb Elia Chazan in the hospital. Reb Elia Chazan was the Rashiv of Torah Das. He was a tremendous lamdan. And remember, like they say, he was by Reb Baruch Ber before the bar mitzvah, sitting in the back without a hat or anything, eating peanuts while Reb Baruch Ber was saying a shir, and then he would scream in and stop the shir cold. It was a tremendous lamdan. And you also have to know that by Reb Shmuel Birnbaum, the biggest accolade you can give a person was that he was a lamdan, or the lack thereof. I remember the Bacha once asked him, are you allowed to smoke cigarettes? So he said, no, it's not healthy. So he said, yeah, but all the studies were done on Goyim and not on Yidden and not on people who keep Shabbos, and we keep Shabbos, all the Bacherische answers. Shmuel Birnbaum looked at him and said, Ich bin nicht kapesik. So he didn't answer even simple questions. One thing I can tell you, dass einer was sagt, als solche krumme Svaras, someone who says such crooked Svaras, emes lamdan vesta kemel nit sein. He'll never be a lamdan. So the biggest accolade was a lamdan, and that's what Rabbi Chazan personified. And he described he went to visit him in the hospital, and he was hooked up to tubes, and it was painful. And he started screaming out of his character, because he was pretty measured. Zu Teira v'zu schara? This is the schar of Teira? Which the Malachim asked about Rabbi Akiva. And he went further and described who Rabbi Chazan is, and screamed again, Zu Teira v'zu schara? And he went further and he screamed it again, Zu Teira v'zu schara? And he said, Medaf davenin for him. On the way home that night, Avraham walked him home and said, it's a bit unusual on Yom Kippur to question Hashem. And he looked at the Bachram, not comprehending his eye, was versteht gar nicht. He says, the Gemara says something. Tesis fragt akasha. Tesis asks a question. It's against the Mishnah. It's Tesis and Apiketis. He's questioning the Gemara. Of course not. Tesis knew the Gemara is right. Aber es ist Sugya, man darf ablernen. He said, emunah is eicha sugya. Of course I know that if Hashem does this, it's good. Aber es ist Sugya, was man darf ablernen. It's a Sugya that has to be learned. And to learn the Sugya, I have to ask the question, Zu Teira v'zu schara. Now we can answer it. So someone once came to me for Yom Kippur, was going through very difficult Nisyonos, and they thought he had a Yeshua, and it collapsed. And they said, I'm not going to shul this year, Yom Kippur. Why? I'm too angry at Hashem. And I can't daven to him. So I said, so go to shul and tell Hashem how angry you are at him. So he said, listen, ad krei kach. I'm not going to go scream at Hashem. I'm just closing down. So I said, listen, if you have an honest relationship with someone and you're upset with them, you have to tell them. He said, but how could you go scream at Hashem? I said, I'll make a deal with you. I'll accept Avera, and you'll get the schar. And he told me he went to shul at Yom Kippur and really let Hashem have it. Afterwards, he felt good, and a month later, he had a Yeshua. So you should know it's part of emunah. Besides so, the Eish Kodesh says that sometimes talking about the anger you have to Hashem lessens the anger itself. It's when you let it simmer inside you that is the worst thing. So anyway, questioning is not a lack of emunah, as the Shiva said.
Right, and it's very important because people can feel very guilty about the feelings of anger that they have. And the Rav saying it's good to, one has to let out.
It's part of an honest relationship.
It's part of an, right. This episode is sponsored anonymously in the zchus of all those going through Nisyonos and difficult challenges. May Hashem grant them the strength to endure, and may they see Yeshuas and emerge from their struggles speedily. Would the Rav say that today's Nisyonos are fundamentally different in any way from those faced by previous generations?
Certainly the spiritual Nisyonos are different, and some of the physical ones. Today, our Nisyonos, both physical and spiritual, a lot of them come from affluence. Previous generations, people had grinding poverty. Now people have gashmias. We also have Nisyonos of our generations, of mitzvos, of immorality and decadence, which you didn't have in previous generations. All Nisyonos are exactly the same. They're a test for us, which will bring out our koiches, which will give us reward. So in that sense, they're the same, but their applications are different because the old Nisyonos have been overcome. Could be at one time, the nisayon was haskalah, intellectual Nisyonos. All the isms. Today, I don't think anyone's thinking b'chlal, so you can't have a intellectual nisayon if you're not thinking. And therefore, they're more physical and more sensual. So yes, the Nisyonos are different, but they serve the same purpose.
So for people who say that nowadays it's easier or nowadays it's harder, that's, first of all, it's not relevant, and who says it's true?
I told of a story that Solomon Zatzal was giving a shmuz in Gateshead that today the Yetzer Hara is stronger than it ever was. When he finished, I went over to him and he said, it's a machlekes in the kadmonim. What is the Yetzer Hara? Is it our malach, or is it our natural inclination? On the tzad that it's a malach, it can't become stronger because a malach can't change.
Right.
And tzad that even our natural inclination can get stronger, but to be absolute bechira, there has to be something balancing it. So what does the mashgiach mean when he says that it's stronger than ever? And he was staring at me. First I thought I insulted him. Then I thought maybe I said some apocarsis. Then finally I realized he's looking at me like I'm a Martian. And finally, he thought many times before he spoke. And he said, Rabbi Zimmerman, you learn Mussar like a Rav, not like a Bal Mussar. He learns different shittas, and according to this shitta it stems, and this one it doesn't. As I learned the Mussar like a Rav. I said, listen, guilty as charged. I said, I was just learning Mesilas Yesharim, Shara Precious, where the Yeshalmi brings down a Yeshalmi, that la'asid lava, you're going to be asid litnus adin of anything you saw and weren't nana from. And I'm sure when the mashgiach learns this, he gets a deeper insight into Precious. I learned from here that this is the makar, as a matter of fact, you look at inside, of the Vilna Gaon, that although you're not supposed to make a shechianu in the 3 weeks, but if there's a fruit that won't be available after the 3 weeks, you should eat it now and make a shechianu, because otherwise you'll be over this Yeshalmi. So yes, but tell me what the answer is. And Amatzio said that, asked me, who's the strongest army in the world? So I said, the American army. So he said at that time, why can't they overcome Al-Qaeda, which is a ragtag band of terrorists? And I said, tell me why. He says, because it's a new type of warfare, which they haven't figured out how to deal with. But once they'll figure out how to deal with it, of course the American army is stronger. He says, that's what I meant when I said the Yetzer Hara is stronger, not the mahus of the Yetzer Hara is stronger, but if it's a malach. I mean, we don't know how to deal with it yet. So every generation, there are new Yetzer Haras. There was a scholar, let's say, and then some Sefer fought it one way, Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch fought it a different way. Once we overcame that, the nisayon disappears because it's no longer a nisayon. And therefore, our generation has different nisayonis, but not because they're stronger, not because they're different. They're new to us. But eventually we'll figure out how to deal with it and we'll overcome it, because a Yid is always stronger than his nisayonis.
And then inevitably, once winning, a new nisayon will come?
A new nisayon will come.
Right. So the Rav mentioned that one of the main differences between today and the olden days is the success and wealth, and therefore poverty, which was a whole different type of nisayon, which we're not able to comprehend, has evolved into the nisyonos of today. But today, in a more affluent society, there's extremes of success and wealth, which obviously comes with its own challenges. In what way does the Rav see that our success and wealth can be more challenging than the poverty that our grandparents had to deal with?
First of all, there's poverty today also, just not to that degree. Basically, the Nisyonos are different. The nisayon of poverty is rebelling against Hashem. The nisayon of wealth is forgetting Hashem. V'yishman yeshurun v'yivat. It's two totally different Nisyonos. They're both necessary. The Ramchal writes in Derech Hashem that the tachlus of Nisyonos is to be miskaber al hara, to overcome bad. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose for each person the nisayon. For this person ashiras and this person aniyas. Why? Because that's the tachlus of this person. But he says you have to look at it as a whole. It's not every individual. The world needs the nisayon of Aisher and the nisayon of Eini. And he says, look at it like the Avdei HaMelech. Just like or an army or the Avdei HaMelech, each one has a different job. But really the tachlis is that the avodah of the Melech should be done. And that's why Hashem chose for different people, different tafkidim and different nisyonos. But we look at it as a whole, and as a whole, there are all types of nisyonos which are given out, which brings everyone to taiv. Why Hashem chose one nisayon for one person, one for the other person? On that, Ramchal says, Zeo inyan niskav de'ef shalam edalav. This is something that no one can understand. There are times in life where you find someone who was very wealthy and he lost all their wealth. And they once asked Reb Chaim Brisker about such a person. Chaim Brisker said that, let's say you go to primary school, then you graduate. If you do well, you graduate and you go to high school. If not, you have to be left back. He said this family fulfilled the tafkid and the nisayon of Aisha. So they graduated, so now they got a different nisayon. So, like I say, all of it is to be miskabel hara. There's different hiskabros. One is not to rebel against Hashem, and the other one is not to forget Hashem.
I thought the Rav would say that they failed on their nisayon of wealth, and therefore they had to go back to primary school.
No, the other way. They graduated.
The Rav touched on before that one of the things that today's generation is also different and struggle with is mitzvos, as shemiras einayim. How should we approach a nisayon that feels never-ending? It's relevant to everyone, it's a constant, and it's an exhausting battle in modern society, which is very new. In the thousands of years that we've been on this planet, this is something that's 50, 100 years old. How should we view this nisayon?
At times that the milchama is the tachlis. It's not necessarily winning the battle. The Eish Kodesh says, success is keeping on trying. It says, Sheva yipol tzaddik v'kam, tzaddik falls down 7 times and stands up. And Rav Hutner said, it's not pshat that in spite of falling he gets up. It's because he fell, he gets up. That gufa is the avodah. Steipler writes that a lot has been stressed about the pagam that a person has when they're nichshel in averis, but not enough is written that for every moment you withstand an avera, the kedusha that you're creating in the world. And therefore this itself, the battle itself, is the tachlis, and every moment of battling creates kedusha in the world. You know, the Vilna Gaon said, kol rega v'rega, that you keep your mouth shut, you create an or agonas. Now, what happens if you keep your mouth shut for an hour and then you plot and say everything you were going to say? Do you get any reward? Rabbi Elul said, yeah, because the Gaon said specifically, kol rega v'rega. He didn't say if you keep your mouth shut. So every rega has value. You know, in Lag BaOmer, couldn't get to Meron, people couldn't get to Meron. So one of the biggest gatherings was a Melech Biderman had a gathering. And I looked at it for a few minutes. And he said a word. He says, what is a tzaddik? A tzaddik is a letter in the aleph base. What is it made up of? A nun that's bowing down and a yud on top. It means that a person could be a nun is from neufel. That's why it's not an ashrei. A person can be falling, and not only that, he's tipping over, but as long as he strives to be that yid on top, that's what a tzaddik is. And the answer to this question is, it's a never-ending battle, because that's what it's supposed to be. It might not be that you're supposed to overcome it, but you're supposed to battle it. That is the tachlis itself. And this battle is good for the person.
Right. And that also means that a person should never feel confident that he's won or that he's invincible in any way, because it was created to be ongoing. So just to touch on children and chinuch, and I know we covered this partially in our chinuch series, but within the theme of Nisyonos, when people face challenges and the natural instinct of parents are to shield them from hardship, believing that that will be ultimately beneficial, that they shouldn't experience too much hardship. But how does one balance that? Because obviously one doesn't want to leave them unprepared for real life, and real life will inevitably have hardships.
I think you have to discuss the hardships with them, but you have to say it in age-appropriate way, because otherwise they're never going to learn. If you say everything's perfect, then they'll never learn anything. There's nothing wrong with children knowing that we can't necessarily afford everything that everyone else can. But you have to be positive about it. Not only that, even in Nisyonos, in spiritual Nisyonos, parents should discuss their struggles with their children. Not appear to be perfect, but you should know, I struggled with this. Maybe I still do, but I'm overcoming it. Rav Hutner used to say that he was very much against all these biographies that paint everyone as a Kaddish Merechem. He says, so then you can't learn anything from them. It's much more interesting to hear how the Chafetz Chaim overcame the Yetzer Hara of speaking Lashon Hara than telling us how perfect he was at the end of his life, and not to speak Lashon Hara. Chafetz Chaim was an outgoing person, and he spoke to a lot of people. He was an extrovert, yet he managed to speak and nevertheless not speak Lashon Hara. That's interesting to find out. I was in Stamford Hill recently for Shabbos. I was Seudah Shlishis in 95. Actually, I ate Seudah Shlishis before, but I came in for the Divrei Torah. Rav Kam Yunke was speaking, and he was saying that a Torah brings Shnei Tzeporen, one which is shechted and one is sent away. What do you need the one that's sent away for? He says, because tzeras comes from Lashon Hara, so you might think you should stop speaking. But that's not the tachlis. The tachlis is, you should shech the Lashon Hara part of the person, but the part of the person that talks and is friendly to other people, is mechazik other people, that's part we need. And therefore we keep it alive and we send it away and say, this is what you're supposed to be. So therefore, yes, we should discuss our hardships in a child-appropriate way and discuss our struggles with the children.
So you're saying it's not a good thing, because what many parents do, if they, let's say, can't afford something, or if there's a health issue, they would, and children would complain, and they would point to other families and say, "What do you think they're happy? We don't know what's going on behind their doors." I think it's a natural instinct to try and show children that Yenna's life isn't better. Is Rob saying that's not the right approach?
It's not the right approach. Yeah, we could be having some difficulty at the moment.
Right. But what if parents are actually worried? Right? Parents are actually anxious. They have fear about their situation, and they're trying their best to tell their children that it's okay, we're going through this together. How do they communicate to their children the hardships of life, but without passing on the fear that children could have a harder time dealing with?
You know, the avodah of all Nisyonos is not to deny them. I have difficulties, but not to be broken by it. Sarah Nisyonos nisnas Avraham Avinu va'omad bekulam. Some people say va'omad and nicht zerbrochen geworden. Of course it was difficult, but he didn't break, and that's what you have to model to your children. Yes, we're going through a hard time, but you maintain your sense of equilibrium, and when they see the parents being calm rather than being anxious, they too will adapt the same feelings towards things. Yes, they're difficult, I don't deny it, but I don't break. You know, someone once came to the stipler and was saying how difficult life is. He said, let me tell you something, I'm a bit older than you. The good times don't last forever, and the bad times don't last forever. When things are good, don't get so excited. And when bad things happen, don't get so tzebracha, because nothing lasts forever. As a person with life experience, Besides the tzaddik, the stifler, the Baal Ruach HaKodesh, things don't last forever. You know, after the Akedah, when you have the Kriyas HaTorah, you see it more in Rosh Hashanah, you have the Akedah, Ati Yadar Kirei Elokim Ata, and then it says, and Avraham Avinu returned to Beersheba. And that's how we end the laning on Rosh Hashanah. Very anticlimactic. Chayra, we should have ended off Ati Yadar Kirei Elokim Ata, Lechasachtas Ben Chiyachidcha Mimeni. Why are you answering, ending off that you're going to Beersheba? Of course, so you got to go back to where you came from. And Rav Shamshon Falher says that most people who have gone through an Akedah would have reached such a spiritual high that they could no longer relate to regular people. They'd walk around with a halo on their head. Avraham Avinu wasn't like that. He had a difficult nisayon. He was oimid on it. He achieved tremendous hishtadlus. And he went back to Beersheba and lived amongst the Knaanim in Beersheba. And that's an avodah in life, to maintain a sense of equilibrium at all times. Not to get too excited when things go good, not to get broken when things are bad. And if we model that to our children, which comes from our emunah and bitachon, of course we have to work on our emunah and bitachon, then they will adapt the same thing.
So it's not a communication skill in any way.
No.
It's something that children will feel.
Mm-hmm.
And the Rav is saying it's a general rule of life to be quite even-keeled, never to get too emotionally strung in any sense. That's a rule of life.
Yeah, I remember on Shiva Reb Shmuel Birnbaum, he would never tell stories or anything. It was just heavy learning. The only time he would tell stories would be Purim in the morning. And one Purim morning, he told the story about the Abel Chanan being martyred by the 7th fort in Kovna. And he read the Hakdama to Kovetz Shurim, where Rav Ashri was there, who escaped, described Rabbi Chanan's final speech, the famous speech that where Hashem thinks we're kabbanis for the Yidden in America, and whatever. When he finished it, he told over the story very slowly. He said, "What is the biggest chiddush in this story?" I said, "I mean, a person about to die and he's thinking about Yidden in America and Pigel." He said, "Nein. It says here that he spoke softly and calmly." You read it, this dibur benachas thing. Most people would be screaming this with his rakshas. He says Rabbi Chanan was so great that he said this for a pashtus, just like you answer what happens if you forget Yalav Yavai at night. So you, I mean, that the same thing, you said it for a pashtus. That is the godless.
So it's almost a gift not to be too emotional.
Again, a person should have emotions. They should be in control of their emotions. I once heard from Shiva Reb David that the Briskerov 1 year couldn't get an esrig. And he was working and it came in and was stuck at the port, and he tried and he tried. Came Hashanah Rabbi, he didn't get it. He was totally calm. I tried my best and that's it, so I don't have an esrig. It wasn't distractious, it wasn't personal. We tried, didn't succeed. Okay.
Right. We spoke about various forms of hishtadlus versus emunah bitachon. But just to expand that question a bit, when people face emotional or psychological struggles, right, then the hishtadlus would be to go for, let's say, professional help. And the level of hishtadlus one could do is endless with trying to solve these emotional issues. And yet others say the reason why the older generation didn't go for more professional help were because they had more of a emunah pshuta. They believed that hardship in life came from Hashem and they'll get over it. What is the balance between a person working on a hardship with their emunah bitachon and, let's say, going to seek professional advice?
There's hardships and there's mental health issues. They're two totally different things. Hardships a person could overcome with emunah and bitachon. Mental health is just a machla like any other machla. Now, even a machla, Hashem gave it to me. So, how should I address it? The answer is, it says, V'rapay yirapay, Mekan shenitin rishus l'roifei l'rapais. Shaloi toimar, don't say that Hashem gave it to me, but I have to address it. The Shach says in Yeridei Shin Lamed Vav that although the Lashon of the Gemara is nitin rishus l'roifei l'rapais, it's a mitzvah to do it. The chiddush is that you're allowed to, but once you're allowed to, you have to do it. So you have to be able to distinguish between a hardship, which is part of life, and a health issue, which is beyond life. Now, how do you apply emunah bitachon when it's a health issue? Like in all machlas, you have to believe that the doctor is just a shliach. The results are already preordained by Hashem. I have a mitzvah of irapeh yirapeh, a mitzvah of hashavas aveda, and therefore the doctor is just the shliach of Hashem. But if not, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. As a matter of fact, the Chazon Ish writes in one of his letters, writes the person was probably ignoring their health. He said, a chayla has only one mitzvah to take care of his health, and that's the one mitzvah he doesn't want to do. So we have to recognize, like every community, we have mental health issues, anxiety, depression, mood disorders, and they need to be attended to. I want to highlight maybe one condition. There's something called postpartum depression, where women after birth, nothing to do with emunah bitachon, hormonally go into depression or sometimes anxiety. The numbers by now are close to 1 in 5 people, and it needs to be attended to. If not, sometimes I get many shaylas has a mamish pekuach nefesh. And even if they're not pekuach nefesh, it sometimes affects the whole family. It's not just the person is a bit down. It affects the entirety of the family, and it's saving a family. Happens to be an organization in London called Menucha, which is under my guidance, that attends to it. And I feel they could use the support, because we have to recognize that it will not be overcome with bitachon. It's just a hormonal disease.
People don't necessarily relate mental health as being just another physical illness. Potentially that's why there's always been more of a stigma. But as time goes on and we're becoming clear of it, they're all saying it's just it's a physical illness like any other, just an illness of the brain.
Yeah, that's correct. And that is our avodah, to destigmatize it, because otherwise you're stopping people from seeking help, and the consequences can be very dire.
Can conditions such as depression or anxiety be viewed at as a nisayon that someone is going through, without obviously minimizing the very real pain involved?
Again, the dismissing, the minute you write like this, the Ish Kodesh writes that, he was giving speeches during the war, and then the Warsaw Ghetto, and he's giving speeches about emunah and bitachon, and in one of them he stops and says, I want you to know that everything I'm saying about Nisyonos is not to lessen your pain, but to teach you what to learn from this pain. Dismissive is when you don't acknowledge the other person's pain. When you acknowledge the other person's pain, but there's still something to learn from it, that is avodas Hashem. And sometimes it's hard. There was a nephew of the Chidush Harim called the Pilitzer, Pinchas Eliyahu of Pilitz. My wife and children happened to be grandchildren of him. And he said every bad middah has its good, sometimes it's necessary. Let's say last week's Pirkei Avos, Az panim legehenim, but it also says how az kanamer. Sometimes gaiva is no good, but vayigba livai bedarkei Hashem. What is kfira good for? And he says, Alfi darkei, Polish Chassidus, that kfira is good when someone else is suffering. It says, Ani knocks on your door and says, I don't have what to eat. So if you're a real maimin, you should say, yeah, that's what Hashem chose for you, and it's good for you, and it's in the nisayon, and live with it. She says, what could I do to help you? So that's the aside, that it's dismissive when you minimize someone's pain, but you can learn something from it.
So the Rav mentioned Menucha, and there's many such organizations made up of selfless, dedicated individuals who are out to help others in areas of physical pain and mental health. As a general rule, what level of responsibility should a person feel towards the struggles and suffering of others?
Of course, there's an inyan of gemilas chasadim. But I think a person has to be clear that you cannot be responsible for someone else's struggle. You can only be mechazik them for them to overcome it. Everyone has their own bechira. You cannot exercise bechira on someone's behalf. You cannot take responsibility for someone else. You know, when I was bacher, I used to see the old-fashioned rabbanim used to give chizuk to people. And then I got a bit older, and I thought maybe they're lacking in psychological insight because they're not really helping them. As I get a bit older, I realized that they had it right, because you really cannot help someone else. You can only help someone go through it themselves. If Hashem is giving someone a nisayon, it's a nisayon for them. Hashem wants them. Of course, you'll afford them any way of lightening the nisayon as a chesed, but the actual struggle of the chesed, they have to do themselves. Our avodah is to make it possible for them to do so, to create the circumstances in which it's easier for them to do so.
Whether that's with practical guidance or just being there.
Just being there for a person.
Right, and I'm assuming if that's the case, then there must be a danger as well in taking on emotional or communal responsibilities that a person is simply not equipped to carry, and a person might get too involved in someone's struggle.
Obviously. Someone lo yaleinu has a brain tumor. That doesn't make me a brain surgeon. I cannot take my plastic fork and knife and start operating on their brain. The person has to know their limitations, what they are equipped to handle, and what they're not equipped to handle. Even more so, you should know there are some unhealthy people, this you find a lot by teenagers, where they try to make other people feel responsible for their struggles, and it's a form of controlling the other person. And it's very important. Many times I hear from a teenager, largely girls, that my friend needs me, if not, she's going to kill herself. And I say, I don't know if she's going to kill herself. Probably not. And if she does, you're not going to be able to stop it. But I know one thing, that she's trying to control you by putting on a guilt trip, and you have to get out of that trap. Only when you're healthy and you have an adult balance with people can you then be mechazik to people to go through their own nisyonos.
Right. Some people, when they're facing suffering, they can start looking for reasons as to why that suffering is coming to them. They start trying to understand Hashem's reasoning. This is happening because I didn't do this. This is happening because I said that, or I was terrible in school and that person wasn't mochel me, and all these things. Is that the right approach, to be more speculative and to try and figure out why things happen?
First, there's a difference between someone else's nisyonos and our nisyonos. Someone else's nisyonos, you cannot know why people are suffering, why the klal is suffering. For that, you have to be a navi. That's one of the conditions of golus, that no one can give us clarity. On the other hand, it is a call for introspection. But we're not Nevi'im. So at the time of the Churban, they asked Alma of the Aretz, what was the cause of the Churban? And Hashem answered, and Dovazeh, this, they asked Zakenim, Nevi'im, prophets, elders, some say even Malachi Asharis, and no one was able to explain it. Until Hashem came himself and said, Azumus Teirasi, they've forsaken the Torah, they didn't say Birchas HaTorah. I once heard from Rav Shach, this was stuck on the beach of Netanya in 1983, he said, if a Navi doesn't know, and a Malach doesn't know, what did Hashem want from us? And he answered, Weiss des, as a mensch ken sich besser wie a Navi. You have to be a Navi to understand someone else, but to understand yourself, or to be able to understand your shortcomings, you could be responsible. So we do have to try to understand ourselves. That's the mashmish b'masav, yitlam b'bitul Torah. You do have to. And there is a concept of middah keneged middah. That Hashem runs the world middah keneged middah, which is to teach us what we have to correct. And therefore, if you want to know if what you're attributing it to makes sense, you have to know, is it middah keneged middah? And therefore, yes, there is such an avodah of doing so. I recently said in a speech after all the happenings in Golders Green that the fear that people are feeling might be, I'm not saying for sure, I'm speculating, because we weren't mishtatif with the pachad of the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, that's why we experience fear. So yes, Suffering is to correct us. At the same time, suffering is to bring a person close to Hashem without any attribution of the causes. And as many people said, before they had Yisurim, they wouldn't want it, and afterwards they wouldn't trade it with anyone for anything. So yes, there's an avodah of introspection, but there's an avodah of coming close to Hashem. Now, after the introspection, will you achieve clarity? Unless there's a real strong middah keneged middah, you don't know. Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai was on his deathbed, and he was crying, and they asked him why, Gemara and Brachas, and he says, Shnei drachim lefanai, one leads to Gan Eden, one leads to Gehenna, ve'eni yedea be'eze derech malech, and I don't know where I'm headed. How's it possible? Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai didn't know who he was. The answer is, at the time of the Churban, Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai was given a choice to ask one thing. And he said, Ten li Yavne v'chachamel. Save the Chachamim of Yavne. So the Gemara asked, why didn't he say, spare the Beis HaMikdash? He made a decision, tefasta meruba lo tefasta. I can't ask for too much. That decision was a decision who either saved the future of Klal Yisrael or caused the Churban. And it's a decision he made righteously, and if asked again during the Ilan Yom Kippur, he'd make the same decision. But I don't know whether it was the right decision or not. So you cannot achieve clarity in this world, but that doesn't stop us from trying. As a matter of fact, Ramchal writes that one of the hallmarks of a nisayon is that you can't know that it's a nisayon, because otherwise it's not a nisayon. So you have to not know something. But we're supposed to introspect, at the same time, achieve the closeness with Hashem.
So what could be a parallel if a person is looking for that middah keneged middah? Because if one finds it, then it's almost easier to achieve if one has a set goal. So if someone's struggling with panosa, with shidduchim, with shalom bayis, whatever it is, what could that be a parallel of?
There are too many things to answer. Each person would have to judge for himself. If it's something that makes sense, not just a story because I did A, so B happened. It has to fit.
Right. But generally a person shouldn't hyper-focus on the parallel. As long as he's taking on something which anyway makes him closer to Hashem, then that's also chosim. So one of the Nisyonos that we touched on as well is uncertainty, especially when there's two correct paths. And uncertainty is a big part of people's daily struggles. Can a person generally have true clarity in major life decisions? Or is uncertainty and this feeling of uncertainty just part of the human condition that a person has to grapple with their whole lives?
It's mentioned before, Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai grappled with it his whole life and even on his deathbed. So it seems that's part of the human condition. You know, during World War II, they had a question who to save. Should they save older Rabbanim or should they save young people? And people didn't know, and they asked Avraham, and he said, you should save the older Rabbanim. They asked him why. He said, because the older Rabbanim will then try to save the younger people, but if you save the younger people, they're just going to forget about the older people. That's a decision like Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai decision. And can you achieve clarity? No, you only see it in the next world. As a matter of fact, it's interesting. Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai said there are two paths. One leads to Gehenna and one leads to Gan Eden. I don't know where I'm going. Why didn't he simply say one path leads to Gehenna and I don't know if I'm going there? Why is he talking about Gan Eden? And Rabbi Aaron Kotler writes that sometimes Gan Eden is more frightening than Gehenna, because Gehenna is a punishment, but it's limited for X amount of time, maximum 11, 12 months. The losing out on Gan Eden is something which is eternal, and therefore I'm afraid of Gan Eden.
Wow.
I think it goes further. The Gemara says, when his Talmidim came in to visit him, he started crying. Why wasn't he crying before? Sometimes a person can't see themselves totally, but when they see the Talmidim who they influence, then they could start thinking, I could have done better. And that's why he started crying about Gan Eden when he saw his Talmud.
They say anyway, at a person's deathbed, then their life flashes before them. They could see all the decisions that they made to lead them to that point. So the Rav is saying that this uncertainty of life, one should be aware of, but it shouldn't bring you down. One shouldn't focus too much on it because it's natural. I think people today, generally, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this was mentioned by a local Rav to me, that people are going to Rabbanim today way more than they used to. Day-to-day life decisions, and going repeatedly, trying to make sure that they are getting guidance on many different areas of life, some big, yet some very relatively trivial. And not to go into a whole Torah series, because that's for another time, but generally, should a person rely on their own judgment when making decisions? Again, we're not talking about anything too major. Or should a person constantly try and seek outside counsel and guidance?
I think let's divide into two. Let's say a major life decision. Should you seek advice, or should you make it yourself? And it says in Pirkei Avos, Mar ba'etza, mar ba'chachma. And it's based, the God says it's based on the pasuk, Chua b'roiv yoyetz. More counsel, more wisdom. If you have more counsel, you get more mixed up.
Right.
You should ask one person, he'll tell you what to do. And Avraham Volozhin says, from here we learn that only a person can make a decision for themselves. No one can make a decision for you because only you know yourself and will deal with the consequences of it. It's good to get perspectives from other people. And that's why Mar ba'etza, the more perspectives you get, more Mar b'chachma in yourself. So the truth is that you're always supposed to make decisions yourself. But you do that through Mar ba'etza. That's number one. Then there are decisions that are inconsequential. And those things you should do yourself simply because you shouldn't bother other people. And it's something, again, Rabbanim have to know as well as the layman. And they decided to move to London. So I went around to visit the senior Rabbanim and went to die in Ehrentreuzel, Zecher Tzaddik L'Bracha. And he said, I want to give you some advice. You're not a psychiatrist, you're not a psychologist, you're not a marriage counselor, you're a Rav and a Dayan. Stick to it. That was his advice. Don't think that you're everything. And you don't think that you're everything, so then people will generally, you'll be able to manage. He was talking about the Rav coping from his end. The same thing for other people. Certain things don't really make a difference. And if it doesn't make a difference, so then you shouldn't use people's time. But what being mechadish is that even when it's important, and you should ask, you should know in the end you're going to have to make the decision yourself. We're just seeking.
So eventually, even if a person is going for many things, when they get used to a style, when they hear Das Torah, when they hear a clear approach to something, again, is hopefully what this podcast is creating, a person could start forming and tuning their brain to think a certain way.
Yeah, that's correct. One of the Tanam says he never said something that he didn't hear from his Rebbe, Rabbi Lezer. And Chaim Shmulevitz says, how's that possible? The answer is, after a while, he adopted his Rebbe's thought process, and therefore he heard everything from his Rebbe.
Right. Is the meaning of a nisayon discovered during the struggle itself, or do people, which is quite common, impose meaning only afterwards, when in hindsight they become clearer of what the struggle was?
It depends. There are different types of nisyonos. There's some nisyonos that are manageable, and you could think about the meaning as you're going through it, and that assists you in going through it. As a famous psychologist said, you can do any what if you know the why. There are other times in life it's so difficult that you have to stop thinking. So the Navi says, in the time of the Geula, Vasirosi leiv even mekir bechem, I'll take your stone heart out of you and replace it with a flesh and heart. And many people understand that it's a Tainan Klal Yisrael. They had a heart of stone. Simcha Wasserman used to say that there are times in life is so difficult that the only way you can go through it is by having a stone heart. Not thinking, not feeling. And the psura is there'll become a time where you won't need it anymore. Many times people felt, I heard this from him, they might have been talking about himself. He had a very difficult life. And you develop a leiv even, And the truth is, Simcha Wasserman was always happy, in spite of a difficult life. Once heard from Rabbi Akiva Tatz that he said, how could he always be happy? He says there are two types of problems. Those that you could do something about, and those that you can't do anything about. Those that you could do something about, I immediately went and did it. Those that I can't, I stopped thinking about it because I can't do anything about it anyway. That's why he was happy. Once heard from him, I ate by him, it says, Mol Oretz Deis Hashem, Kemayim Layom Mechasim. Like the water covers the ocean. What does it mean like water covers the ocean? He says, when you look at the ocean, it looks flat. But really you go underwater, and there are hills and valleys under the ocean. But the water shapes itself to the contours of the hills and the valley. One day we'll look back at all the Nisyonos of this world, and we'll see how they fit perfectly. That's Kamayim Layom Mechasim. Maybe in closing, it says, Asar Nisyonos Nisnasa Avraham Avinu. Why does it say Avraham Avinu? The Mishnah before says, Asar Aderes Minayach Vad Avraham. So Taisus Yantiv says, we have schus avos. The person has a nisayon, they have to know they have schus avos. Chaim Volozhiner says, based on a pasuk, Hoylech L'tumei Tzadik Ashrei Banav Achrav, that any nisayon that Avraham Avinu had, he put it in our spiritual DNA that we can overcome it easily. Throughout history, many people died al Kiddush Hashem. How could they do that? It's against the instinct to live. The answer is because Avraham Avinu did it, and it became part of us. People wanted to move to Eretz Yisrael suddenly, when there was tremendous hardship. That came from Lech Lecha. People have financial tzaras, and they don't break. That's because Vayhi Rav Ba'aretz. And therefore, it's Avraham Avinu, he did it in the fact that we're our father. And therefore, we all have Nisyonos in life. If one could wish someone a life without Nisyonos, I don't think it would be the right thing to wish, and we can't wish that. What we have to know is that Nisyonos are lafi koyches. They're good for us. We already have the koyach of Avraham Avinu to help us overcome it, and we have the schus avos. Yiratzen that the galus should come to the end, and we'll all have a leiv basar.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Rav, for coming in again, and thank you for a very educational and inspirational series as always. Please send any questions, any feedback to podcast@federation.org.uk. We look forward to hearing from you and really appreciate the Rav's time. Thank you.